Good evening, UUFRC. This is John Anning, and tonight we're celebrating the retirement of our Reverend Gretchen Woods. We wish we could all be together, but I'm glad we can continue this tradition of having a goodbye interview. Gretchen, you've been with us now for 3 years. We've sorely needed your big heart, your experience, and your light-handed leadership during this time. And I just wanted to start by thanking you for your service to our congregation.
Thank you so much, John. It's nice to feel appreciated. And I'd like to light a chalice for the whole community that we have served. And the chalice is sitting next to a bouquet of flowers that was given to me this week by the worship associates.
That's nice.
I just so pleased by their gift. And the chalice, of course, represents the whole community. So their flame is with us today. So John, I am remembering that you were the very first person with whom I had a conversation when I very first came here, long before I actually officially started as your minister. And it's a delight to close the circle with you in this way. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And that's kind of a great story, and maybe we'll get to that a little bit later,
Yeah.
but I was so reassured. I remember I was anxious and I had a lot of concerns, and you heard me out. And then at the end, basically said, you very nicely said, you're worrying about nothing. It was great. So that's kind of a funny thing to come back to, because we were getting acquainted that day. And these talks have an aspect of getting acquainted, because you've been, I don't want to say playing a role, but you've been holding a role for 3 years. And this is a chance to sort of shed the familiar a little bit and speak about things that maybe, if you want, are outside of that role. So one get acquainted thing is, what is it we don't know about you? I mean, what are hobbies, favorite places, favorite foods, anything surprising or that you feel like maybe we don't know about you?
Wow. Well, I have tried to be very open and clear with the congregation through my preaching and other things. And it's been a pleasure to do that. And, I always get the question, what did you ever do that really no one else knows? Well, I'll give you one of the stories, and some of you will laugh and some of you will be horrified. But in fact, when I was one of the youth advisors and we had a party for the leadership at that congregation back in the late 60s, early 70s, the other youth advisor and I streaked the party. And people were always very surprised, but we had a lot of fun.
Oh, there you go. That's something we didn't know about you. And Judy told me actually offline that if we had been able to meet, if there hadn't been the virus, you were going to do that on the 18th tonight, but oh well.
Yeah, I'm not going to streak this.
Well, let me ask you, since you're talking about the youth ministry, there's sort of a big part of this is a looking back at your career and what I would consider the arc of your ministry. And I want to start at the beginning with something you mentioned, which is that your family unknowingly influenced you to become a minister. That sounds kind of mysterious. So tell us about that.
Well, it's kind of interesting. My mother wasn't much for telling me exactly what to do, but she was at a loss for what I should do after my father did not support me to become a surgeon, which is what I had been preparing for all through high school. In the tradition of that era, he said, no, you'll get married and have children, and you will have taken the place of a woman in a college that some man could have had and used for his life career. Well, I was so in awe of my father that I decided not to do that. And so I decided to do the thing that I loved, but I didn't have much talent for, and that was music. And so I went into music and became a music teacher. And one of the things that I realized is that as a person who had to work at music who had to really pay attention. It influenced my spiritual practice of paying attention, and it also influenced my willingness to go another direction when things weren't going the way I needed them to. So it built for me flexibility and that willingness to, okay, that's not going to work, let's change. And see what I can do that might be useful in the world. So I really enjoyed music teaching, and several of the other teachers told me that knew this story that maybe because I wasn't a natural, that made it me a better teacher. That those who found it hard but loved music like I do, that made me better able to find different ways for them to connect to their own music that was in them that they didn't know how it was. And of course, my siblings were so influential because we sang and played together throughout my life after I was 11. When I was 12, my mother created a barbershop quartet with the four eldest, and we sang together professionally all up and down the Eastern Seaboard, particularly the Jersey Shore area, doing all kinds of music, which is really, as I said earlier, my spiritual practice in many ways. And so I didn't do it alone. I did it with my siblings. And when the younger siblings came along, my brother Jim became a prop. Well, that sounds awful. But Jim was pulled out on the stage when he was about, let's see, he was maybe 6, and he would kneel down on the stage with his hands in a prayer position. And we would sing Christopher Robin is saying his prayers, and all the little old ladies would cry. And it was very successful.
So you kind of like that contributed to the theatrical aspect of ministry. I want to go back to something you said because I never, maybe lots of people know this, but I didn't know that you were intending to be a surgeon. So I'm just going to say this as maybe an odd reflection on how that relates to being a minister, because you are doing surgery on people's hearts and minds. Sometimes having to replace a heart, and
Oh,
I see that as related. I also want to say, so what you're saying about music is that, and I is that because you didn't, that thing of being a natural. I mean, we all struggle. All of us that are attempting to do any art, I think, especially, struggle with that idea of, well, like, how much talent do we really have?
yeah.
And I struggled with that a lot. And I came from a family that was very fatalistic. And so I just kept saying, well, maybe it wasn't meant to me. Maybe it wasn't meant to be. But I think what you're saying is that struggle leads you to have much greater empathy when you're teaching, because you know the value that music's going to have for those people. And you don't want them to let their fear or their concern about talent get in the way.
And that also shows how my maternal grandmother, who was a voice teacher, had an effect on me as well, because she always said, you can breathe, you can sing. And I had pitch problems, but she always got me back into a more relaxed place, and I could breathe and I could sing. And it was very powerful for me. So she was a big influence in that way too.
Well, they all tie together. To me, even the surgery ties in. The idea of
Yes, it does.
mixing of ultimate care, of music and teaching, and working on being on what you're talking about. What I'm hearing you say is that you've had to cultivate agility your whole life, agility to move with what's really going on, not get stuck. And I can relate to all of that. I think those are inform your ministry. But the next part of my question is, so what have you found the most personally sustaining about being a minister?
Oh, well, the reality of ministry is that it never gets stale. Uh, it calls us to explore our biggest challenges and find ways to deal with them and to help other people do the same thing. And the thing that was important to me was not assume that my biggest challenges were their biggest challenges,
Right.
but to have the skills. I talk about a toolbox, to develop the skills so that I can offer them different tools, so that the only tool I have is a hammer. If that is so, then everybody's got to be a nail, and that just doesn't work. And I'm a pragmatist. The question, does it work, is really important to me. So what I have to do is look for different skills, not only within myself and different understandings, but different ones that speak to the other person, and connect with them and help for them to find a way to deal with their issues, not my issues.
You know,
That's powerful.
yeah, and it's interesting that you say that because I think that one of the things in all kinds of work that people do, but especially I can see in ministry, is you don't want to prescribe until you diagnose. You know, it's easy to have pat answers or here's what worked for me. But if you're more saying, well, what's going on with you? And I can see that skill in you. And I can also see why that's sustaining to you, that you've developed that. And I think that leads to this other thing, which is about your career as an interim minister, which is interesting. And I'm going to start with a question, but I find that that's interesting for a bunch of reasons, that you would be there and go there and deal with all these different congregations. So here's my first question about that. Do all congregations think they are special and easily misunderstood?
I love that question, John. And the answer is yes. Some of them feel they're special because they really feel that they haven't known how to relate to a minister, and they don't realize that that's a two-way street, as much as they feel like they may not have done things right. And so one of the things that I see as a job as an interim minister is to be able to encourage congregations to realize that it's not all them and it's not all the minister. It's truly a two-way street. And so being able to recognize that it is in relationship that so much of our need to be special and yet lack of ability to be special is challenged. And that's one of the reasons why I say one of the biggest products that churches need to realize that they need to have is ways to build healthy relationships.
And when you say that, do you mean, but well, I think you must mean both within congregant to congregant and also congregant to church leadership, like boards and committees, and also to the minister, like basically in all ways.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm going to take a minute here and say, Judy, could you please close the door? We're getting a lot of truck.
Yeah. Now here's on the same topic. I think about this idea of coming to a church as an interim minister and knowing that you're leaving. Like trying to you're not trying to become the 10-year or the 20-year or the rest of my career minister. In your case, it was going to be the rest of this part of your career. But how does that feel, and how do you manage that? It takes a different, there's something about it that's a different skill set to be all the way engaged with finality from the first day, you know?
Yeah, to know I'm pre-fired, as I often say. Yes, exactly. Well, it's not easy. I mean, I really do create relationships in each congregation, and there are people I work closely with and that I have to work closely with. And it's hard to know that I'm going to walk away. And it's hard to know that for 3 years, I'm going to have to not discuss anything about the church. And if I have any sense at all, I will never again discuss anything about the church with the members of the church. I don't want to distract from their developing relationships with the new minister. And I have had the advantage of going on 3 times after my first interim so that I had a new group to interact with. It's going to be much more interesting this time when I move on and I don't have another group to immediately interact with as a leader. And I don't honestly know how I will manage all of that, but I do have to say that my spiritual practice is very, very helpful because it gets me regrounded into my own body and recognizing the things that I need to do to be whole in myself, to not need that large group of people to confirm who I am. And that is
Mhm.
important to me to keep that skill alive before I re engage with another church. And of course, I have a project that I'm going into. I want to finish a book that well, the working title is Untangling Trauma. And it's about trauma not specifically in individuals, but in groups,
Hmm.
systems, human systems that have had bad experiences and need to find skills and tools and ways to reconnect with one another, reconnect with those people. And that's why it was so important to me to help each congregation create a covenant of right relations in the second year, because that's key for moving on and for being able to continue their personal development as a system.
It's interesting because I wrote down the word covenant because I think that interim ministry, it's so intense. You've had intense relationships.
Yes.
The relationships are just as big as if you were at a church for 10 years, but maybe sometimes there's a sloppiness in the covenant that can happen when people get so familiar for so long. Um, the fact that you're preparing us from the get-go to be, as you said, I think pre-fired and to love somebody else. I mean, in a way, and also it means that you have to keep the covenant tight the whole time. It can't, if it gets sloppy, then the interim relationship gets sloppy. So I just want to say that I wrote that word down before you said it because I think that is a real skill to what you've been doing.
And we're all human. We all have moments when we lose track of the covenant, but we also can recall it and bring it forward for everyone involved in that process. That's why I love the ouch and oops. You know, I've had my oopses, I've had my ouches, and it's really helpful to have that little flag you can send up and see if we can deal with this now.
Yeah, and I wish I remembered to use both of those more because I have a tendency to want to make a big story about things, and sometimes that just gets in the way, you know. I want to bring up something. I'm sort of going to jump around a little, but
Sure.
you start talking about retirement. One of the congregants said something to me because I keep using the word repurposing. April 1st, I officially retired. And
Mhm.
there's others that are my friends at church that are either just started or thinking about it or wondering about it. And you're looking at retirement after a long accomplished career. And the question was, well, just what's coming up for you? You've started talking about it, but also any advice you have for others looking at this kind of transition. People decide are saying, when do I do it? How do I do it? How do I know it's going to be okay? Um, just you can just vamp on that idea if you want.
Well, it's a great and important question, and I have mentored many, many ministers. I ran out of fingers and toes to keep track of them. And sometimes at this age, I sometimes forget their names, but they come back eventually. And the key piece here is that I remind them that they always need to have something else other than ministry that they do. I remind my mentees from the very beginning, you've got to have something outside the town you're serving in that you can do that is very satisfying for your heart and mind. And for me, that has been singing in choirs particularly gala choirs. And gala choirs are part of an international gay and lesbian choral association. And every 4 years we have a big gathering. We never compete.
Hmm.
There are no prizes. We simply sing for one another. And it is such a joy to do. And being involved with that one other activity is really important. Now, I have mentees who are knitters. I have mentees who are runners. There are many different ways that people find something else outside. Quilters. Oh my God. Yeah, I do have quilters. So you get the idea that my mentees are finding way. Oh, and a dancer. I have a dancer too. But you get the point that we need to have something else that feeds our soul in addition to the work of ministry.
Hmm.
And that's really, really key. And I actually have already, with Judy and two other couples, created a gala choir in the capital of Oregon, in Salem, Oregon. And I may take it upon myself to see if we can put together a gala mixed choir in Sacramento, the capital of California. We'll have to see. And of course, I will continue writing. There's no way for me to stop. So I'll probably, after I get through the actual book, I will probably wind up blogging.
Well, I mean, on this note, I think you're answering two questions at once, and one of is about your vision for retirement,
Right.
and it's also about the question, what would you have? What would you say to others? And what I'm getting from what you're saying is, first of all, it's sort of like you don't wait until you retire to start
Oh,
thinking
no.
about it, but maybe you start to have this ramp that says, okay, so in your case, I'm a writer. I'm going to have more time to write, and I'm going to use that time to write. I'm a musician, and I'm going to have time to be a musician. I'm going to use that time to be a musician. I'm going to. I typically wouldn't want to interject this, but I'm going to just because we know each other well.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've done is I've started taking drum lessons as part of my retirement. And
Ah,
people go, "But I thought you already played drums." Yeah, I do, but I'm taking drum lessons from my favorite 28-year-old drummer in the Bay Area. And I'm getting so much out of that. And I'll just give you my reflection on the things you're talking about is having something new to do gives one the chance to focus on humility and whether or not you really have the discipline to change. And I like what you're saying because it's not you're not talking about wishful thinking. You're talking about expanding on what you already do, just having more time for it.
right.
So, as far as you and Judy, and you're moving to Sacramento, anything else that jumps out? You've already bought a house, right? Did you just buy a house?
Well, we're Monday we sign.
Okay, fantastic. Wow.
Tuesday we get the keys. Wednesday we may be picking up a refrigerator. We don't know yet.
Well, but I didn't want to leave Judy out of this as a discussion because she's been a great part of your relationship with the church. What kinds of things do you guys see having more time to do together, and what do you hope to enjoy, like up in Sacramento?
Well, I won't speak for Judy. I'll speak for myself. If you want, we can drag her into the picture. But for me, I need to rest. Going from one to another to another to another interim has without time, frankly, to grieve. The leaving of a group that I've gotten to know well and to love, and the time to not be running on adrenaline too much of the time, which is very important for me because I have adrenal hyperplasia, is important for me to learn to, you know, that's going to be part of it. And so those are my two first real goals. Judy has some ideas that she wants to explore. She's always been fabulous with animals,
Mm.
and her daughter is also fabulous with animals. And I suspect that she'll find ways to help out in some humane society or something. But she also is a very accomplished videographer, and having her to be able to do some of the she's the projects that she's wanted to do, but we don't have enough room in our house to do. We are getting a house where she'll have an office and a studio more than an office. And so we're very hopeful. She has collected a huge bunch of Legos that she's hoping to do Lego animation with. Is that fair, Judy? Anything else?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, that's a
It's
good
okay.
answer.
It's
Did you
okay
hear
not
her?
to know. But let me,
She,
yeah, I do. But let me ask you something about, you used the word grief, and I want to throw that in here because I think that that's an interesting word because we associate grief with tragedy, death, things like that. But I could look at, I could say you're going to have a nice new home of your own instead of an apartment, a bigger home. You have all this free time. You're going to get to write. You're going to sing and all that. But I hear what you're saying because change brings grief, even when it's happy, positive, or whatever. And I think it's a word that's helpful to us if we're willing to look at it. I think sometimes people don't change because they're so afraid of feeling that. So could you just talk about why is there grief about all the freedom and expansiveness that your life is about to take?
well, it's not so much about what my life is about to take, because, like Judy, I don't know about a lot of that. It's about having to leave abruptly congregations that I poured my heart and
Mm,
body and soul into, and let them know that I have to maintain healthy boundaries so that their next minister can get their full attention and they're not distracted by me. And so that's tough stuff. And people don't realize that their kids experience grief not only when a beloved pet dies, but when they change schools.
mm,
That any major change incurs loss, and the loss is a source of grief, even when we're going to something that is better. Um, and for people who, like myself, who have committed the last 35 years of my life to ministry, uh, the the idea of letting go of all those connections is an incredible source of grief. So I'm really grieving things from the past now,
mm.
because you pack up your house, you move on to the next, especially as an interim, and you start right out, as I did with you, which was weeks before I actually had the contract starting. And it's okay. It's because I love to do these things and to be with people, especially people who've had disappointments with leadership, and question whether ministers can even be uh, aware of them. I think
Yeah,
that
that's interesting. Well, that is funny. I mean, again, we're bringing up that I was the first congregant that you met, and now I'm picturing someone told you, this guy's a problem child.
actually, no, you did. You called me after I agreed to be the interim, and you said, I need to talk to you. Nobody else
Oh,
told me.
that's funny. Yeah. So
I
I knew
did
I'm a
not hear
problem
about you
child.
from anybody else.
So
It's your own self-image. Maybe we should talk about
yeah, we could talk about that. Let me turn the camera on. No, but I think that and that was just such a great, it was a great thing. And I'm glad. I'm not very shy and I don't want to treat ministers. That's just a big picture thing. I think the hierarchical, old-fashioned picture of,
that.
wanting to put a minister way up on some throne and then eventually throw rocks, is not a healthy thing. That's my opinion. But I want to talk about you a bit, and
Yeah.
this is a real big picture question, but you have a unique perspective, and that is, how do you see the long-range outlook for Unitarianism, for Unitarian Universalism as a faith tradition? Like, what's going to happen, do you think? What should happen? What can happen over the next 5 or 10 years?
Well, we're either going to succeed or we're going to become irrelevant. Um, and I think that the leadership over the past decades have actually seen that and recognized that this continent is even more of a stew, or is certainly not a melting pot. Uh, but we have people from all around the world. We have people that we need to become interculturally competent with. And we've finally got some people with the skills who have built coalitions, particularly Susan Frederick Gray, who has built so many coalitions between and among people that can make that happen. It's uncomfortable for us because we are an upper middle class intelligentsia, very impressed with ourselves bunch of people. I won't get into John Buren's overweening skills of not skills, overweening problems of UUs. But I will say that we tend to be very content with the United States with good reason, because the American Charter is Northern European white values. It is not of this continent. And so the efforts on the part of leadership over the last, I'd say, 10 years at least, have been such that we are moving toward a recognition of the intercultural quality of this continent. And we will either find ways to speak to that are effective, or we will become irrelevant. Now, I have been working on that the whole time of my ministry, and I was lucky to find the work of Bailey Jackson at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst around developing skills and understandings to change people's attitudes and behaviors. Now, this is truly what we need to know how to do for those of us who are white. It's true about white fragility. It's true about our assuming white supremacy. I was fascinated when the chorus that we started in Oregon attracted a lot of transgendered male to female singers who were wonderful. And we even had a couple of female to male singers who were wonderful. And we found that some of our people, even gay people, were uncomfortable with them. But we stuck with it, and we said, this is who we are. And eventually it was fun for us to, in a concert, realize that people were looking up at this choir and they didn't know what they were looking at. And we brought that discomfort that we have had to work with to the audience. And despite that, they loved us. We developed a very big following as a full alphabet, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, questioning allies. We had at least 3 couples every single year who were cisgender married couples who sang with us. And so we had this spectrum, just like we had a spectrum in race in that group. We had, hidden differences, and we had obvious differences. Our director was and still is how tall is Ray? 6'3", maybe 6'2", African-American gay man. That was for starters. So it was one of those things where I see it to be possible. And it gives me great hope that we really recognize that our UU values, that we are all one people, can be lived out. And that we work on that and we get over our sense of entitlement and recognize that, yes, sometimes we're going to have to give up some leadership things and other things to allow other people to answer the phone. No, to be able to express their gifts and skills. You follow me?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think so. I think I'm happy to hear you say those things, and it's not a guarantee. It's if we can,
right,
be we started this interview with you talking a bit about agility through your life, like how these things happen to you, how you adapted to your reality. And you're sort of looking at now this church.
Sorry.
That's all right. With that message again, that if we try to hold on to especially our image of ourselves, perhaps as noble, liberal, good, without question, and can't embrace change, and again, maybe to your point about conceding leadership, or just following, or just being somebody else's helper instead of trying to prescribe. Those things all make sense, and I like you used the word pragmatic earlier. That's a pragmatic, and I would use the word sober look at reality. And now to us specifically, because in the end it's all about us. What are your hopes for UUFRC, and do you have any unvarnished advice? I mean, this is your chance if you have any.
Well, first of all, I think you have gotten the plum off the tree of ministers that you could have had. You absolutely, Brian is going to be wonderful with you, and he has some very strong ideas about this and visions, and he will want to create allies within the congregation to help him with those ideas as they are needed here in Redwood City. It starts locally. There's no question about that. And it means that those who have been looking forward to someone with the same kinds of visions will have a support. It's not my job to do public ministry as an interim minister. Now you can do public ministry in a much more meaningful way. It's not good for an interim minister to become the face of the congregation to the community. It's something I realized because I had been the face of the congregation in 3 communities. And I realized if I do that, I'm making it harder for the next minister, not only in the church, but also in the community. And that's why that is so important, really, to be aware of that. And developing a recognition that what this congregation needs to learn is how to talk to each other. When I first came, I was told by the leadership of this congregation that communications was a real issue. And I found it was true. It really is a real issue. And it's not just, do we get the message from each other? It's even more so, do we listen to the message from each other? And the other piece is that so many of us have so many good ideas in this congregation that we are sure the only thing that should be done, and that's why we couldn't even narrow the main idea down from 72. Peter Hartzell has a list of 72 projects that this congregation wants to do, but they're all invested in by 1 or 2 people. And there is not a recognition that if you're going to get a project done, do what the Republicans did in 1980, prioritize and pick them and focus on one with more energy, get that one working for 5 years, which is literally how long it takes to institutionalize a project, and then start on the next one. And look how successful they were. They gave us Trump. I'm sorry, but it was very, very organized and intentional. I'm not sure they really thought that's what they were getting was what they wanted. But you see what I'm saying.
I do. I think
so I just want to add one more thing to that communications. When Aldous Huxley was asked at the end of his life, what advice did he have for people in all that he learned in all his years of being a scholar and a student? And he thought a minute and he said, of all things, try to be a little kinder. Try to be a little kinder. When we get head up about something that we want to do, we're not interested in anyone who needs to be sold the idea. And we don't realize that kindness is very effective in building consensus. And that's an unvarnished piece of advice.
That's very, yeah, that's very interesting, and that is a whole topic that
It is.
we could continue because I see us as we have a high regard for inclusiveness, we have a high regard for kindness, and sometimes then it makes it feel like it's hard to prioritize and form a commitment and give up some ground and to compromise because we're all trying to be inclusive to each other and kind to each other. Kind doesn't necessarily mean Kind does not mean giving lip service to every single idea that comes up while
No.
only promoting your own, right? So that's all it's interesting.
Yeah, it's kindness engages the person so that you actually hear them and they might have something to add that you're losing out on very often. And just because they're not coming at it from the same angle or they don't use the same language, or there are all kinds of reasons that we misunderstand others and whether they are committed to the idea, and we assume they aren't, and then we put them in the opposition camp, which they don't belong in most times.
Yeah. I knew I would learn stuff from this interview. I knew this is what I wanted to have happen for me personally and for the congregation, that they would get to hear from you in a slightly different way. It does not totally different. They're going, yes, I know this woman, and yet I'm hearing these other things. It's that leave them wanting more thing. I mean, I think we're all going to go away from hearing this and going, damn, couldn't you stay a little bit longer? And so that's a good thing. And I want to say, I want to give you the last word, but before I give you the last word, I just want to thank you again. I do think you're exactly what we needed, and you knew how to be what we needed, and that's pretty amazing and unique. And so, Gretchen, thank you so much for coming to us.
Well, you are so welcome, all of you. I definitely hope that you will remember a few of the little tidbits I've offered you. And if nothing else, Aldous Huxley's wonderful quote, of all things, try to be a little kinder. And I know that I have ways in which I wasn't kind, ways when I got frustrated and probably said something unkind. And I also know that my heart will be with you for the rest of my life, with all of you and with what you really care about and hope to be and do in the world. And so I am delighted to be able to do this with you and to share with you uh, a little bit more of myself. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Gretchen.
Bless you.